your host, Bill Reel. Hey, how are ya?
Good, how are you?
Hey, awesome. Life is great. I'm a little hoarse today. I don't know why. I didn't do a lot of talking yesterday, but my voice is a little crackly.
It's from all the drinking.
I actually did have some drinks last night, and maybe too many. I don't know. That's possible.
I noticed that if I drink too much, my voice tends to get louder without it meaning to, and then the next day I'm hoarse.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That explains a lot now for me. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Awesome. We're just having a little bit of a technology issue, so our guest will be with us here shortly. Before we kind of get to there, what kind of things is Mekael working on this week, or what kind of things have kind of confronted you?
Oh, let's see. Just lots of up and down with the coronavirus stuff, which I'm sure everybody is feeling. It's hard to know. Like, I was talking to one of our friends, and she was saying that some of the projections show that we'll be in this kind of slow uptick until October, and that I lost my shit. I can't do this until October.
So yeah, it is strange. We're in it's like this thing is happening, and it is, right? Like the cities are facing it one way, we're facing it another.
Right.
And here we are again. For those listening or watching that don't live in Southern Utah has very few cases still.
52 cases of, let's see, Southwest Utah, 52 cases, which includes Washington County, Iron County, Garfield, Kane counties. So,
and it's not growing exponentially here. It's a little slower than that because, again, social distancing is helping, but also we're more of like suburb, rural type of community. Looks like our guest is here. So, but yeah, the way that we're all kind of, and I kind of hear like a reverberation of what I'm saying from your speakers. I don't know if maybe, you. So I don't know if you can maybe just turn your earbuds down just a little bit. If you can turn the volume down just a touch. But I'm going to add Ryan here. Ryan, good morning.
Good morning, guys.
So Mekael and I were just talking about COVID-19 and how we live in a different area than the big metro cities that are getting nailed. And it almost requires multiple approaches depending on your geographic location. And for those in suburbs or rural areas, it's a whole different kind of thing watching this unfold slowly, right?
Yeah, I believe so. It seems like, especially areas that have really dense living, they seem to have suffered a lot more early on. I don't know how this will spread as things continue.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be slower to the suburbs and the rural areas, but I don't know.
Yeah, Mekael was sharing that, she's a little scared by the projections of how long this may go on, that we have to socially distance from each other. And I'm with her. This thing is unfolding so slow here. If you were in New York City, you'd be like, hell yes, stay inside. Like, let's do that. But here in Southern Utah, you're just kind of watching this unfold slowly, and you're missing being around folks and being around the people you care about, and to watch this thing be projected out. Mekael was saying October, but maybe longer, maybe shorter, but it certainly has disrupted all of our lives.
Yeah, quite disrupting. Yeah, it's an odd feeling just being out in public. I personally start to feel a little like even a little anxiety just being anywhere in public. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that.
We have a sign for customers to stop at and leave about 7 foot of room between them and me. And some customers just think this is all fake news, and they just walk right past the sign, right up to my face, and put their dirty television 2 inches from me and don't give me a chance to kind of control the interaction the way I want to. And I've even had people cough on me. I had one lady, she came in yesterday wearing gloves to protect herself from me, and then got in my face, breathing in my face. And I'm like, lady, how about you protect me from you too? Anyway, Mekael, tell us what we got here. Who's this guy with us today? What's going on here?
So today we reached out to one of our good friends, Ryan Poulsen. He's a first responder, and we just wanted to get his perspective, pick his brain a little bit, hear about his story. And so we're super glad that he could be here.
Glad to be here, guys.
Like the last time I saw you, I don't think you had it, but I love it. I think it's hot.
Yeah, it's fun. I grow it and shave it and grow it and shave it.
Dude, coming from a lesbian, if a lesbian tells you your mustache is hot, dude, that's a hot mustache.
I'll take it.
Right? I mean, right? Like when a lesbian gives a compliment to it for us guys, it feels like it's a whole nother kind of thing, huh?
I really appreciate it.
So I guess I want to ask this, and I know I've asked you this at dinner before, Ryan, but how did you even get into being a fireman and a paramedic and being an emergency first responder? How did this even come about? Tell us the story.
Well, I guess almost accidentally. I'd always been interested in medicine and medical stuff, and that was my original path. And that's what I kind of studied in college. I took an EMT class to get some practical experience. Prior to my intent was to apply to medical school, and that led to becoming more and more involved in the EMS side of things, and volunteered and then worked for a while in a hospital, and then started working on an ambulance, and I really grew to love that. And then that turned into me turning this into a career. So yeah, that's kind of how it developed.
Ryan, what is like your most favorite part about being an EMT or firefighter, and do you do both?
I do both. I am a firefighter, but just as with most fire departments and agencies, the vast majority of our response is medical response. And so I am also a paramedic. And so my primary job as when we arrive on medical scenes is as a paramedic. And so I act in that capacity as a medical professional, I guess, on scene. But as far as what I enjoy about it, it's incredibly satisfying. I mean, it sounds trite, but helping people, especially in times of crisis when things have come off the rails for them, and a lot of times that's when we respond. We get called when people's lives have become uncontrollable, and so we try to bring a sense of control back to them at that time. So that's incredibly satisfying.
What's the difference between an EMT and a paramedic?
So paramedics are EMTs, okay, but there's kind of a leveled system. It's like 3 tiers. There's an EMT basic, which is the kind of the base level. They have basic skills. They respond. You'll find basics in a lot of rural systems. There's a EMT intermediate, or they call them EMT advanced. In some areas, they add a layer of skills and abilities and a scope of practice at that level. And then kind of in the field, the next level up is a paramedic. And paramedics are we kind of have the broadest scope of practice and have the most advanced skills and the most training in EMS, if that makes sense.
You talked about giving people control back. I got to imagine, and I want to at some point to get into some of the cases that you've seen that were on the extreme side. But when you say, like, I go into the home and part of our job, and I think this is a beautiful thing, is to help give people back a sense of control in situations that they feel helpless in. Talk me through that. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, what are things that first responders do to help people feel less helpless?
Yeah. So depending on the emergency, if it's a medical emergency, someone might be feeling something or have a symptom, or maybe they had a fall and broke something, and sometimes they don't know what they have going on. That's quite frequently the case, and sometimes they know what basically is going on, and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. And so a lot of people, when they lose control, they'll call 911, and we show up and try to fix that problem. The same is true with a fire emergency or a vehicle accident, or lost in the desert, or any of those kind of calls. Something's gone wrong where they've lost control of the circumstance. Sometimes that's just as far as giving them back control, sometimes that's just giving them a little bit of information. Hey, here's what's going on. Here's your options. Here's how you can go about repairing that situation. Sometimes that's taking control of the situation, and up to and including like intubating people or performing CPR, or putting someone's house that's on fire out. So all those different options, and truly it's quite diverse, all the different calls we get. it all kinds of calls for all kinds of stuff.
Ryan, so how do you maintain your sense of control and not panic during those situations? Because I'm sure that, like, and I imagine initially you probably had a lot of anxiety or, stress yourself trying to figure out how am I going to manage the situation, and how am I going to help my patient feel calm and in control when I'm feeling like, wah.
It's like anything in anyone's life. I think when you first are exposed to it, it's jarring a little bit. You feel like a fish out of water. You do feel those anxieties as you become exposed to things, especially things that you see over and over and over again. The more often you see those, you kind of understand the arc of how this thing will go about or go down, how you need to respond to it the most appropriately. And so training goes a long way. Experience goes a long way in calming those kind of anxieties down. But there's always stuff that comes up that surprises you. And in the end there, I guess just being exposed to that experience over and over and over again, feeling something unexpected come on, and then dealing with it, that in and of itself becomes a skill that you kind of develop.
So COVID's no big deal for you right now. Like, you don't feel any anxiety. You're like the master of controlling.
Not at all.
No?
Not at all. This thing's a little bit more, at least for me, we don't see pandemics every day, right?
Right.
And so, and when you start digging in the literature a little bit, like the R naught, like how many people can be exposed by each individual because of the long time it takes to show symptoms of this thing. Those things are really concerning. And not that I worry about myself. I'm relatively young, relatively healthy, and I don't have a whole lot of pre-existing medical problems. The thing I worry about is I know I'm exposed to work. I've ran patients who have active cases. And then how do I interact with, my family at home?
Right.
And then, yeah, like for me, this like social distancing thing, I no longer go into the stores because I just don't feel comfortable being out there. Like my parents, they have a lot of medical problems right now, and I can't be around them. So we try to help what we can, but I have to be very cautious about how I interact with the public.
Sure. It's so interesting. Kelsey and I haven't been to the store in a while, but we get our kids this week, and so we went to the grocery store yesterday to just make sure we, had stuff. And it's super eerie in the store. It's eerie interacting with other people who are practicing social distancing, and like Bill said, it's really interesting watching people who think this is all a hoax and it's not real, and you can tell that they don't care, and it'd be interesting to find out what their rationale is. Kelsey and I were talking a lot about conspiracy theories and the psychology behind conspiracy theories, and it's just interesting. And in my position, it's been a week and a couple of days since I've been at the clinic. They've scaled family medicine back greatly, so I haven't interacted with patients in a while. But I can't imagine, like, how are you and Lara handling that? Like, what are things that you're doing at home or when you get home to try and protect your family? And where do you see this going? How do you see this playing out?
Well, as far as like my routine, I've always been a little bit cautious about what I bring home from work. And so like my standard is before I leave work, I shower there and then change into my street clothes and come home that way. And so then when I'm home, then same kind of thing. I take those precautions. I mean, here at home, hand washing's probably been gotten a little bit more involved, I guess. But when I'm here with my family, my kids, they're all home and they're not going anywhere. So we just interact as a family the way we normally would here. The only thing that's changed is really the kids aren't going out. When we have to do shopping, my wife has to do the shopping. I do have a mask for her that she can take out at that point, so that, because again, not that I'm worried about her getting anything out there. It's what I might transmit. So
I'm curious, Ryan, like, this is the Almost Awakened podcast. I know you personally. I know that you are very much on this side of life and thinking critically about things. How, like, being a paramedic, being a fireman, coming up on scenes with tragedy, with people's lives in the balance. I'm just curious your thoughts on, like, on this side of things, how you, for good or for bad, how being a critical thinker, how being aware of how messy the world is, how complicated things are, how complex things are, how much that goes into like how you handle situations and how you interact with people. Any thoughts there on being kind of an awakened person and dealing with people kind of like you pointed out earlier in their worst moments when they're scared to death and have no idea like how this situation is going to turn out and as tragedy is kind of happening right before your eyes?
That's a really good question, Bill. And I guess for me, one of the most interesting things, and it's really affected the way that I view life, is you can watch people in intense or extreme circumstances, and they're trying to make sense of their experience. Whatever the experience they're having is beyond typically what they've normally experienced. And so you can see them trying to make meaning out of that, how to create a narrative of how to make the experience they're experiencing right now fit in the greater narrative of their life. And so, and I can see that with people. I also have experienced that myself as part of, like when we have a really critical call or a particularly tough call, like a pediatric call or a bad trauma or something like that. We typically have what's called a critical incident stress debriefing, with a chance where we pull everybody who's involved in the call aside, and basically everyone just gets the chance to talk about what they experienced. And it's not like it's a deep sharing of feelings. It's just kind of almost recounting a narrative of what they've seen and what they've experienced. And it may seem kind of like a trivial thing, but the interesting thing is you can kind of feel a difference when you're able to take what you've experienced and fit that into kind of the narrative or the story of your life. And I guess that helps me understand being awakened, because it's like once you become aware that you're creating stories and you watch other people do it, especially in extreme circumstances, the differences between the reality of the experience and the narrative that we kind of tell ourselves about the experience becomes highlighted, if that makes sense. And so I became aware, kind of through these experiences, I became aware of that narrative making experience. And once you're aware of that, it kind of awakens you to the fact of all the things that are going on around you aren't necessarily, especially the way you remember them or the way you tell yourself a story about what happened. You become aware that you're actually telling a story. You're not experiencing it or even re-experiencing it. You are creating a narrative, and that changes your perspective, I believe, a lot.
Yeah. The process, like, again, taking a moment aside to kind of get together with the group. But as you said that, I'm thinking back to other facets of life, types of therapies and types of experiences where people are trying to be more expansive in their thought. Meditation practices, for instance, when somebody goes into a group like AA or other places where you get a chance to sit and talk, there's such importance in getting together with other people who are sharing in a similar life experience, or maybe even the same experience, perhaps as you going on the scene, and to get together with the rest of the crew and to have a chance to talk and kind of process. It also gives the newbies a chance to hear how the veterans deal with these kinds of things. I gotta think that's kind of an important piece of setting it aside at the end of the day and going home to your family and not carrying this kind of stuff with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're listening to a group of people that you have some connection with, at least, and a lot of those connections become quite tight. And so, you're not just constructing your own narrative, but kind of a group narrative there too, on how to deal with this or how everyone else is dealing with this. Yeah, that gets thrown out, I guess, not explicitly, but implicitly. Yeah, that's absolutely being kicked around in the room.
Ryan, I'm sure that you deal with a lot of loss and death. And so how do you handle those situations? And have your own views on death changed since you've been in your career?
Yes, very significantly. When I came into this career, I had a pretty firm belief in a religious style afterlife, and I viewed death in a specific way. I'd been raised in a religious upbringing, and so I would sit in church or listen to people whom had the same religious background, and they would recount stories and tell about these kind of faith promoting experiences. And a lot of times those would revolve around these really extreme kind of circumstances. And when I first came into the profession and I started experiencing those kind of experiences with people, but not as the experiencer, not the person who was involved. I was more of an observer. I got to watch someone else go through those experiences over and over and over again. You could kind of see how that old narrative that I'd always kind of subscribed to kind of started to fall apart. I would watch people have an experience, and I saw it. I mean, they're observing it in one way, and then I would hear people recount the experience and in a different way. Especially, I worked and lived in the same community, and so there were times when I would run across people I knew and hear them kind of recount the experience, or when I would be sitting in a church meeting and listen to people recount their experiences, and it was a little bit jarring occasionally because I hear this experience. I'm like, oh, they're describing this, and I've observed that before, but they're giving it a totally different meaning. And so it started to kind of undermine that narrative that I'd grown up with. And the meaning making, I guess, that I'd always been handed, I started to have to kind of rethink that and develop a new narrative that more closely fit the things that I was observing. And so it's changed it a ton over the last several years.
Yeah, and I want to ask a kind of another question along with what Mekael just said, which is juxtapose those two. So on the first half of your career up to this point, you came into it with these religious beliefs, and you had this confidence that if one of these folks who's having these tragic moments, if they died, and people do die, you've seen it, they're going to heaven, they're going back to God, they're going back to be with their family. And then on this side of things, that kind of certainty doesn't exist, and maybe we believe something completely different. Juxtapose those. Like, what is that? How did your narrative come into play as you go into homes with tragedy happening, both on one side as a believer with confidence that it's going to be okay in the end, and then now with that certainty being kind of deconstructed, and now you go into situations knowing like, life is precious, and maybe all we have is this moment.
Yeah. So on one side is kind of like a little more, I guess, like a magical view where people believe a lot of things. And I guess those stories can be quite comforting. I'll reference like The Life of Pi, the book or the movie, depending on who you see. And he talks about how he tries to give this kind of horrific experience, and he finds a different story to tell it. And so those myths, I guess I'll call them, those can be comforting from the onset. But the problem with them, and the problem with my worldview as I started, is that as it came up against repetitive extreme experiences, it was a fragile narrative. It was a fragile life experience. What it didn't do is it didn't map very well onto reality. And as I had more and more of those experiences, that worldview became very, very challenging to hold because it wasn't lining up with what I was observing in the world. And so on one side, I say, it was adaptive in that it allowed me to deal with a small amount of problems and disappointments. But that worldview, or the worldview that kind of started this whole thing with, became very fragile and kind of broke apart, and just by observing the experiences over and over again. Contrast that to what I'm living now. It's not the worldview I have right now is not as comforting in some ways, but it's more resilient. It's stronger in the long term, because what it does is it maps up against reality much, much, much better. And so I feel like I gave something up to hold the worldview I hold now. But in the end, it's a stronger worldview. It's a worldview that the narrative holds with reality a little closer. I'm not pretending that my worldview, maps perfectly onto reality, but it maps much closer. And so when I observe something, I don't get surprised by it as much. It doesn't cause a complete remodeling of how I'm viewing things in the world.
So, Ryan, what would you say have been some of the most influential things to help you shift that worldview? I'm particularly interested in how you've learned to manage the stress and the anxiety that the job brings because, as a nurse practitioner, I'm in family medicine, so I don't deal with emergencies very often, but I find that whenever something unexpected or emergent comes up, I have a lot of anxiety. So, like, I want to know some tools or resources that you've used to help you navigate?
So I use a lot of things. I do some meditation, which I enjoy that. I'm not great at that, but I probably a couple times a week do a little bit of meditation. That helps me a lot. I read a lot, and I find myself reading a lot of books about social science and psychology and those kind of books. And I find that the better I understand, this lump of stuff between my ears, like the better I understand that and how the brain reacts to all kinds of problems, the better off I am. The more I understand, just like anything, I guess I am kind of a guy who likes to understand what's going on. Once I kind of understand what's going on, I feel a lot less anxiety, a lot less stress about it. And so I find that stuff helps me out a lot.
Curious, what are some of the extreme situations you have come up on? Maybe two or three of the just all hell broke loose, or somebody was just in the midst of some horrific moment. I'd love to know, essentially what some of those situations kind of look like. I've sold carpet half my adult life, and I've worked in a pawn shop now for several years, and I'm not seeing any kind of medical emergencies here. I'm just curious. I'm sure a lot of listeners are interested in what that field looks like, because there's got to be moments where the adrenaline's really going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, I get asked that question a lot, like, well, tell me something you see. And it's like, let me think. Because it does kind of end up being like paintings on the wall a little bit. Like it's stuff that you live with and see as normal. But one of the, I guess I'll hit something that kind of, it was emotionally jarring to me at the time was I was a brand new EMT basic. I was in school, and the first time they ever sent me to do a clinical rotation through the emergency department, I walked in the door, got about 5 minutes of a little bit of an orientation from somebody, and then one of the instructors who was teaching the class I was in rolled in off the ambulance with a patient, I think she's like 13-year-old girl who had been ejected from a car, and she was in a seat collar, she was on a backboard, and she had a huge laceration across the whole top of her head. And like one of the EMTs was holding the head. And I was like, well, and she's like, come here quick. And she had me hold the head. And as I put my hands down with the gloves on this 13-year-old girl, I'm looking at her, I'm seeing that her scalp is opening up. If I release at all, first it starts bleeding a ton, but then like literally her face starts to kind of slump down. And so I held her, and it was probably, I don't know, I spent about 3 hours with that patient that day, holding her head, just because I was a bandage. I was a large Band-Aid that day. But I got to interact with her parents as they came in, and we went through CT and that whole experience, all the X-rays that were performed and the blood work and all that stuff before they finally sent her up to have that wound closed up. But it was quite jarring initially, because I absolutely had that feeling like, I should not be allowed to do this. Someone should find a professional to come do what I'm doing, because this is too much for me. I just remember seeing that and experiencing it for the first time. And I still have elements of that when I come across something that's like, wow, I'm not used to seeing that. I guess it has to be
really tough with kids. It has to be when you come up on a scene with young people, children, young adults, teenagers, whatever it be. That's got to be kind of the most heart-wrenching moments.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's particularly heart-wrenching, like when my kids were those ages. Like, I ran a handful of drownings when my kids were young, in those same ages, and that was tough. More recently, a few years ago, as my kids started getting the teenage years, we had a call with a car. I think it was 4 or 5. I believe it's 4 kids in a car that was traveling at probably 80 miles an hour on a residential street that T-boned an older gentleman in a car. And there was 3 kids in the one car that my partner and I on an ambulance were initially assigned to, and we pulled all three of them out. And as part of our job, one of the functions we perform is we pronounce people that, you follow strict criteria, but once they meet that criteria, they're like, okay, we're not doing anything else for this person. And so my partner and I, we pulled three of the patients out of that car, and all three of them were pronounced dead right there. And the fourth was then extricated from that vehicle and transported to the hospital, and said okay. And the gentleman in the other car was transported but died later. So I think 4 fatalities on that call. And I guess the thing that kind of stuck with me on that is it's not the most terrible experience I've ever had, but the kids were close to my kid's age. That was one of those circumstances where we did perform that CISD afterwards. And my partner and I on the ambulance, because we didn't transport one of the patients, got missed in that group. And it was the first time in my entire career I was like, oh wait, this thing's affecting me. I noticed the next couple calls, like I'm usually pretty patient with people, but I noticed that my patience was not good. My partner actually noticed my patience was not good. And I noticed conversely that his wasn't either. And so we actually had to make a call like, hey, we're not doing all right. We need to talk to somebody. And so they pulled us aside in that same process, just trying to talk through the circumstance and create narrative was very helpful. And so, yeah, those calls, they come. And like I said, when they're a little bit more personal to you, the other circumstances when you happen to know people or have developed a relationship and see them again or again, that's where it gets hard.
It's interesting, Ryan. I'm super impressed that they provide resources for you to be able to reach out and talk to someone, because I think that's probably something newer. I don't know if that's happened. I mean, has that been something that they've offered from the beginning of your career, or do you feel like that they are encouraging your profession to be more open and talk about things that you guys struggle with?
So that part of it, that critical incident stress debriefing, has been part of my career from the beginning. Ever since I started with a fire department. That was not the case when I was working with, earlier on in my career with an ambulance. But that's been going, for the last, 10, 15 years. I've definitely been part of that. It's gotten more serious. In the early on, it was kind of like, someone said we're supposed to do this, let's do it. But we've gotten a lot more intentional about it, and there's been a lot more, statistics or the mental health inside of first response kind of professions, police and fire and EMS folks, it's a major problem, and it's kind of come over across everyone's desks the last few years. It's a lot more prevalent in our conversation, and so I know the people around me I see kind of scrambling now to up their game as far as mental health and access to resources. But yeah, it's kind of always been there. It's just gotten a little bit more intentional, I think.
What are your thoughts? Like, again, just one almost awakened individual talking to another, but to somebody who sees death much more regular than the rest of us. What are your thoughts on death? What are your thoughts on what death means to you? How have you processed what that means, and I guess kind of where you're at in the present moment on what death is?
Well, what's that?
Just kind of a follow-up. Bill thinks that the last 3 minutes are like the worst, just before you die.
Oh, so Ryan and I have talked about this. I've told Ryan, this scares I'm a positive guy. I think I've had 8 hours of depression in my entire 41 years. Death scares the living out of me. You know what I mean? Like I've thought about those last 3 minutes, and I keep asking people like, hey, Mekael, are those last 3 minutes going to be okay? And hey, Ryan, are those last 3 minutes going to be okay? And we have all these movies about, the person just smiling as they drift off. I don't think that's how it happens. Your guys, again, your thoughts on death.
Boy, and I think we're probably even talking about like the dying process here, not necessarily. I mean, my thoughts on death are, I have my own beliefs about death. That's death, right? But probably the dying process. Is that what you're getting at, though?
Well, Mekael brings up the dying process, and let's throw that out too. But just on this side of things, I'm scared that death is final, and it does change how I interact with people in the here and now, day to day, because all I know that I have is this moment, and maybe there is no next moment. So I want to ask about death, like the end and how you process that in your own head. And then Mekael brought in the whole last 3 minutes of dying. So let's hit that too.
Okay. So as far as the death thing, yeah, Bill, I think you and I have very similar beliefs on this. I don't anticipate having, something on the other side of death. And I'm okay with that. I think it makes me a lot more in the moment. It makes me a lot more aware of where I'm at right now. I'm not putting off a lot of stuff to, for the other side of death. Now, I don't know, like if I die and something else is there afterwards, great. I'll take it, whatever it is, right? But at the same time, I feel a lot more intentional in my day-to-day living. I feel a lot more interested in the moment and where I'm at and the people I'm with and the pleasures that life has to offer now as a result of that kind of belief in death. As far as the dying process, is it a beautiful thing? Is it a terrible thing? I'll say yes, it's both. I think there are deaths that are relatively silent and, match up maybe a little bit better with what you see in movies. But, the vast majority of death actually has a little bit of ugliness to it. And I don't think it does us any favors to romanticize it. Most people, no matter how peaceful they are with their thoughts of what comes after life, struggle to stay alive. And I think it's kind of hard to suppress that. And so, dying can be ugly. Quite often is ugly. And so does that make me afraid of it? I don't know necessarily. There's a lot of things that are ugly in life that we go through just fine. So I don't know. Good question.
We spiral out sometimes. Like if the last 3 minutes are the shittiest 3 minutes that someone can experience, is the 70 years leading up to it worth it, right? Like these are the kind of things I sit at home at night and I'm sitting next to my wife watching television and I get lost in this spiral for 5 or 6 minutes of going like why even do this whole thing? Why go 70 years of mostly good times only to have these last 3 shitty minutes and then all of it just comes to a close and the you that was part of this universe is no longer in existence. These are the spirals that Bill Reel gets lost in
that sounds like
pretty regularly. It is. It happens pretty regularly. I never used to think about this stuff.
I think it's good to be aware, right? That death can be ugly, right? But at the same time, I don't think it's worth worrying about. Back to that being in the moment thing, right? One of the beautiful things about the possibility of there not being something after death is that we enjoy what we have now. And that's the same thing, there's not a whole lot of use being caught up in the vagaries of what that's going to look like other than to know that it's coming,
Yeah.
Yeah, so why not have the most fun while you can?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that doesn't mean I need to go to Amsterdam and stick a needle in my arm, but at the same time, it's like, but absolutely, enjoying the simple pleasures of life, and honestly, they are most of them simple pleasures. Being able to sit with friends and family and loved ones and experiencing great music, movies, plays, all that kind of stuff. There's great pleasure in that, and you appreciate it more if you're not thinking about, well, gosh, if I watch this movie is going to make it so I can't have this afterlife. There's not a whole lot of point in that. At this point.
Yeah, Kelsey and I just watched a movie called Just Mercy. Have you seen it?
I don't believe I have. Is that?
It's about a lawyer in the 80s and 90s who tries to get wrongly convicted people off of death row.
Oh wow!
It's really good. And in the movie, you see, of course, it's in a reenactment of a man who. His appeal was rejected multiple times, and so he ends up going to be executed. And his cell, or the guy neighboring his cell, the guy that's going to get executed had been to war and had severe PTSD, and so he would have panic attacks a lot. And the guy next to him would help him through this breathing process to try and get him to calm down and just be in the moment. And it was interesting because they portrayed that in the movie. This guy's going to get executed. They're putting him in the electric chair and the process of that. And you see him remember what his friend taught him about breathing and calming down. And I just think it's interesting that we can do that. We have power over our emotions and our thought processes, and maybe not at the end of life, but I still think that there's some beauty to understanding that circle, that at some point it's going to happen to all of us. And, I love how you point out, let's not worry about it right now. But let's not be in denial either.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those things that lives in tension or in balance. Being aware of, again, of the realities of life, what it really, how well our view of it actually maps on reality is important, because it does create resilience. But at the same time, spending a lot of time and thought about the worst parts of that probably doesn't do us a whole lot of good. And so it's like the Buddhist second arrow story, right? Like the first injury is, or the poison arrow story, right? The first injury is the arrow, and the second is the poison. And we can spend a lot of time poison ourselves with those thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, so I just want to ask one more question, and then I think Bill's got a question for you. How do you prep for going to work? Like, do you think about going to work? Are you... Probably not. You probably live super in the moment, but I imagine I would like, I gotta go to work tomorrow, and I'm sure shit's gonna hit the fan at some point. Do you ever worry about that?
Yeah, there are days, right? So the vast majority of days, it's like anyone going to work. I've had other jobs, and it's you have days that you're like, oh man, it's a good day to go to work, and other times you're like, I really don't want to work right now. But yeah, there are times when especially, I think when you have something that's kind of rattling around your head that you haven't processed yet, and you're going to a place where you're going to have to process more. Yeah, there's been times when I have a commute, and that commute does help me kind of think through things. But yeah, there's times when you hit the parking lot, man, oh boy, here we go. But I think everyone has those kinds of experiences.
What are some of the most influential works for you that have been, impactful on you? Books you've read, maybe certain podcasts or podcast episodes that you've listened to. I guess I'm just trying to see what kind of things outside of, we've talked a lot about your career, but as an awakened person, what are some of the things that have been most influential to that development and to your view today?
Well, actually, one of the things is just friends and good conversation, because I do come across a lot just having good conversations with friends, not just the way things that they share with me, but the things that kind of come out as we have conversations. And so just having good people around me has been very, very, very helpful to kind of develop my worldview a little bit more. As far as things I engage in, I read a lot of books. I have a lot of time. Well, I say I listen to a lot of books because I have a lot of time on my vehicle. Some of those, I love Jonathan Haidt. I think he's been very influential to me. Yuval Harari, Sapiens and Homo Deus. I am a huge fan of Sam Harris. I love his podcast. I enjoy. I've read a couple of his books. I really enjoy that. Recently read Robert Sapolsky's Behave, which was incredible. Life-changing, I'd say. Yeah, those are some of those that kind of pop into my head as ones that not only have I read, but I've revisited several times, and kind of revisited and learned a lot from those different influences.
Love it. I think that's part of the awakened life, is just continuing to learn. And like you say, if you've got a little bit of a commute to get to your work and back and forth, it gives you some time to sit and to take in new information. I love just learning new things, and having talked to you, I know Mekael does, having talked to you, I know that you just like to learn. You like to engage new views and be challenged by new things, and have people who believe different things than you kind of bring those out and have a chance to kind of wrestle with that. I think that's the awakened life. Mekael, do you have anything else that you wanted to ask Ryan? Is there anything else that's kind of on your mind? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think Ryan's just one of the most calm people that I know. Just and super smart. I love picking your brain. I love having talks with you and seeing where, like what you're learning and what you think. And I like, I've had one experience with a first responder, and it was from a car accident when I was a kid. And like, I can't say enough. I'm just gratitude for what you do and the person that you are. And I think it takes a lot of guts and a lot of knowledge to be able to do what you do and handle the variety of emergency situations that you face. And so, I never got a chance to thank the first responder that helped me when I was a kid. So just thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Mekael.
Yeah, somebody has to come in tragedy and make the best of it. And whether it's a firefighter, whether it's a paramedic, that's really your main job, is to come into stressful, tragic situations and help the rest of us make the best of it. Man, that's a spiritual work in some ways, as I'm sitting here kind of thinking about that. So like Mekael said, I just would extend a thanks as well. And appreciate that you chose that as your thing to do. We all have to do something, and you chose that as your thing to do. There are important jobs, and then there are really important jobs, and you've got one of those. So thank you. Favorite song, Ryan? Like, what's the song we should play? What's the song on your mind right now, or something that strikes you as a way to close out the podcast?
Boy, Bill, that's the hardest question you've asked me today. I was not prepared for that. Hey, I'll defer to you guys. I enjoy music, but I think, gosh, I'm not ready for that.
Do you have a favorite,
how about this one? How about this one? Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd.
Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd. Awesome. We'll do that. Ryan, we're going to let you go. We're going to talk for a minute here with you away from the podcast. But I can't wait till this social distancing thing is over and I can enjoy a beer with you and just have a good time and just kind of get back into your space again, my friend.
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
Tell Laura hi. We miss you.
Yeah.
Miss both of you guys. I'll let her know.
Okay.
I'll let her know for sure.
Take it easy, my friend. Love you.
Right, guys. Love you too.
So, Mekael, what do you think? What's Ryan? You're in the health field, and I take that seriously. You work to help people get better. You deal with illness. You're talking to people who are not well. They need something addressed. But again, I think you pointed to it, like these frontline people on the most tragic moments on a daily basis. It's a whole nother game than. It's a whole other game. Like none of us deal with that kind of stress, like life or death moments, at least weekly and sometimes daily, probably for some days on end.
Right.
Thoughts there?
I can't imagine his job and I wouldn't. That's a position I wouldn't be able to cope well with, just knowing myself, and I'm already an anxious person to begin with, and so constantly being faced with those tense types of situations, I don't think I would handle well. So I'm grateful that there are people that can do it.
Yeah, my ego is soothed by the fact that I have way more success than failure at my job. And I have to imagine in a job where even when you are on your A game, people die.
Happens.
People die. To go home having done your best and personally you succeeded, but the narrative in front of you is that you failed. I can't imagine the kind of angst and stress that comes along with that. The rest of us get to feel successful at least a significant portion of the time as we fix things or succeed at things, or at the very minimum, kick the can down the street for someone else to go address,
I think that would have been, that maybe that's a follow-up question we ask Ryan at some point, is like, even if someone does end up passing away or the situation is more dire and you're not able to resolve it, like, what does success look like to you?
Yeah.
Maybe it's you've done all you can and you did your best, and even though the outcome was different than what you envisioned, maybe that still gets to be counted as a success. I don't know. And I think maybe that's a lesson we need to learn ourselves. Just because it doesn't end up the way we want it to, does that really mean it's a failure?
Right. If we were healthy in the way we interacted in any given moment of our life, the outcome really isn't the measure of whether we succeeded or not.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's pretty deep. That feels like a really deep kind of thing for all of us to kind of arrive at.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, Bill. You asked me earlier what I was working on. This week has been such a roller coaster, and I've been up and down, just more down than up. But anyway, I was having a meltdown moment, and Kelsey is just doing her usual thing, which she's super good at, is just holding me and loving me and helping me through those moments. But she said something, and she's said this before, but for some reason, it was like a light bulb this time. And I have this perception that the people that I'm close to, they have to put up with me. They have to, there's just certain things that they have to just put up with. And so I said to Kelsey, I'm so grateful that you put up with me. And she was like, Mekael, I don't put up with you. I don't. I choose to go through those things with you. But I enjoy those moments that I get to go through those hard things with you. And her saying that was like, I don't know, it was a light bulb. I heard it differently for the first time than I've ever heard it. And I think that that's really important. The people that we love and who love us, they don't put up with us.
Right. It's a positive thing to have the people we love in our space. And while all of us wish it was all good times all the time, that's not realistic. That's not human. Somewhere out in the middle of the forest is a tree that's only had good days. But us humans, we're going to have bad moments. We're going to have tragedy. We're going to see loss. We're going to see ourselves in our worst moments. We're going to see others in their worst moments. Part of life is to experience that with somebody, and especially those that we care about. Well, I good conversation this morning. I enjoyed talking to Ryan. I always enjoy seeing your face and having the conversation with you. A lot of fun. So
Same.
We'll end this. But for those listening in the audio version, get ready to rock out to some Pink Floyd. Wish you were here.
Okay.
So play the music. Everybody check us out, almostawakened.org. If you like what you're listening to, please donate. This is a different thing than the kinds of topics that I've talked about in the past. We're just excited to hear from our listeners. We get messages from you guys. We love you. We're glad you're listening. If you have a certain topic you want to see us cover, or you want to see, or you have a certain response to the things we're talking about, don't hesitate to message us. You can do that through the podcast website, or you can email us at almostawakenedpodcast@gmail.com. Mekael, love you to death. Have a great week. And
I wish I could see you guys soon.
I know. Let's do it. Pick a day. Let's do it. I can't wait. Okay, have fun.
Like social distancing is over.
Yeah, this thing has got to end. And when it does, I am going to make sure that our group throws the largest party we've ever had.
Yeah.
And there may be people that never make it back to their house. They just pass out on kitchen floors. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I will tell you, it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the times that I've interacted with Ryan, I did get too drunk and he carried me to the car with a garbage bag around my head, so I didn't puke all over the car. So that may happen again.
Okay, there we go. First responder, even off the job. I love it. There we go. The fireman carrying somebody. Cool. Have an awesome week. And
Love
listeners,
you,
love you too. And listeners, thanks a lot for listening.